You've turned on Sexy Marriage Radio, where the best sex happens in the marriage bed. Here's your host, Dr. Corey Allen.
Welcome back to another episode of Sexy Marriage Radio, where we're going to have an interesting, fun, enlightening conversation, I can tell already, with today's episode, where we just try to have straightforward, honest conversations about what goes on behind closed doors, or on your couch, or on the table, or in the car, or wherever married sex may be happening. We want it to be fantastic. We want to have a deeper connection that happens in your relationship, and to touch on all kinds of aspects and topics. And the way we know where we're heading with a lot of our episodes is from the Sexy Marriage Nation itself. And they call us at 214-702-9565, or they can email us at feedback@sexymarriageradio.com with their questions, their comments, their thoughts, their topics that they want addressed. And we try to head where they want to go, because this is listener-driven radio by the sexiest audience in the world, which is the Sexy Marriage Nation. We also ask you, if you like what's going on here, please jump on iTunes and rate and review us. Help us climb the charts and spread the word. And so that leads me to how I met or found Dr. Chuck McNee, who I just met, 10 minutes ago right before we started getting the show rolling. But I was doing some Googling on tantric sex and spirituality and some of the myths and surroundings, I don't even remember how I found you, Chuck, but I remember that was what started it, which then led me to my guest today, which is Dr. Chuck McNee. He's a clinical psychologist, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And then I'll let you fill in the rest real quick, and then we'll kind of get into the research and the topic that you've kind of made a name for.
All right. Sure. I've been teaching and practicing psychology since 1984. Actually, 5 years in San Francisco at a small private college. And then since 89, I've been in Langley, British Columbia, Canada, teaching at Trinity Western University, which is kind of the premier Christian university in Canada. And I teach human sexuality and personality and some other subjects, but my main area of research has been in the area of sexuality and spirituality, and kind of got into that. Oh, I should say something else about myself. I've been married for 42 years.
Congratulations.
So my wife and I were puppies when we got married, and and we still enjoy our life together for sure. We have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and we're just really blessed to have them living fairly close so that we can see them. That's good. Very regularly, and it's great. It's great to be alive and great to be part of family.
Right. And so what I'm intrigued about is the whole concept and the interplay between sexuality and spirituality, because that's how I found you. Right. And just in the research and I believe the quote that, if I'm going to paraphrase this, was that the spirituality of sex for Christians is actually better than tantric sex, or something to that effect that you said in some article. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more. So how did this unfold?
Yeah, I think that article was from the Vancouver Sun, which was one of the big local newspapers, and they try to spice it up and make it controversial a little bit. But,
of course.
I'll just tell you a little bit of how I got interested in this. We live in San Francisco. I heard the name tantric. I hadn't really heard much about tantric sex before. And so I investigated a little bit, and it's obviously the Hindu Eastern kind of religious pathway, actually, to find spiritual nirvana. They use sexual kind of techniques to do that, which was interesting. But then I discovered something as I was working with clients. It seemed like when they had some kind of spiritual experience, it affected their sexual experience as well.
Okay.
So I had a client that was very depressed and one day she told me that she'd never had an orgasm with her husband, or never had an orgasm in her life, actually, and depression certainly inhibits libido. But I thought that was curious, and we talked some more. Things were getting a little better, but one day she came in, and I could tell that things were different.
Right.
And I asked her what had happened. She said, "Well, our neighbors invited us to go to this church, to these meetings. We aren't church people, but we went. We found God, and that was pretty incredible. But here's the thing that really amazed me: went home and had sex, and for the first time in my life, I had an orgasm."
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I started reading the mystics. I started reading John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and Catherine of Norwich and different people. And I discovered that as they commune with God, they commune in very, very erotic language. It almost sounded like they were in some kind of spiritual, sexual connection with God that, again, was quite intriguing to me.
Yes.
And then I was looking through history a little bit, and I came across this idea, or this fact, actually, that the early, the frontier, 150, 200 years ago, was evangelized by the tent meeting, and there were these men that would follow these meetings from town to town. They were rogues because they knew that spiritually heightened women were easy. And
Fascinating. Okay.
One cynical observer actually said there were probably more conceptions and conversions at those meetings. And so it got me thinking that the sexual and the spiritual must be pretty close together, in terms of their energies and in terms of their origins and so on. And so I started doing research, and I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation, actually, on the connection between sexuality and spirituality. And this is what I discovered. You want me to just go for it?
Yeah, go. Yeah, you're doing great. I'm just going to buckle up and come along for the ride.
Okay, we'll go for it. So I discovered, at least in my understanding, that the root of sexuality, to me, is incompleteness, yearning for wholeness, that there's something missing.
Okay.
And so I'm yearning for completion, and I'm looking for another person to complete me. And what is the root of spirituality? I think it's the same thing. It's incompleteness, yearning for wholeness.
Okay.
There's something missing, something that is meaningful, that gives me purpose, that I think is transcendent. I believe God. And so we're yearning for that. So out of this state of incompleteness, we are yearning for more. And that's kind of the root of sexuality and spirituality. And my favorite definition of sexuality is actually by a person named Nelson, who says that sexuality is who we are as body selves, who experience the emotional, the cognitive, the physical, and spiritual need for intimate communion, both spiritually or both creaturely and divine.
Okay.
And so there's something going on there. And as a Christian, I started thinking about that in terms of what the Bible says about that. And the Hebrew word for sex, obviously, is yada, which literally translated means to know.
Okay.
Old King James says, Adam knew Eve, she begat Cain.
Yep.
But it kind of indicates that there's this deeper discovery, this mysterious knowing that only happens when we are intimate, sexually with another person. And then I discovered that's the same word used for God knowing us in the Hebrew scriptures.
Really?
In the prophets, God knows our hearts, and God knew us before we were born. It's the same word. It's a very sexual and spiritual word. And if you look at the metaphors used in the Bible, they're very sexual, right?
Yes.
God's relationship with his people. In the New Testament, it's the bride and the bridegroom, and they get it on, And the Old Testament, it's God saying through the prophets, "Why are you whoring after other gods? I made you to have sex with me."
Right.
You're just going to be disappointed. You're just going to be unfulfilled and unsatisfied. So there's something profound about this. And of course, the two really big garden stories in the Old Testament are the Garden of Eden. We don't know much about it. Two naked people who communed with God. Wow. They called it paradise.
Right.
Must have been pretty special. I mean, and the other garden story is the Song of Songs, which is a very erotic duet that
Yep.
obviously between Solomon and his lover, and many people think that's an allegory of God's relationship with his chosen people,
Right.
and so there's something really kind of mysterious about all this, and of course I think the church throughout history has been very affected by, at least the early church was very affected by Hellenistic doctrines like Manichaeanism and asceticism, Gnosticism, which separated the body from the spirit. And so the body's bad and you put it to death, and the spirit's good.
Right.
And you elevate the spirit. And so sex and spirit, like that's just, that they're separate.
They're not good things together then. But in
Not at
reality,
all.
wait, hold on, maybe
In
they
fact,
are.
If you're really spiritual, you aren't sexual, right? I mean, so
I hope not.
that's the way. I mean, I think in some ways the Catholic Church might be a little bit influenced by that, because if you're really separate for God, you're celibate.
Right. Right.
And so in the Middle Ages, they had all sorts of weird ideas about sex, and if you had sex, you need to go through this cleansing process before you could be take communion again, and all those kinds of things.
Right.
So anyway, all these things kind of lead me to wonder what's really going on here, and to try to investigate this relationship between sexuality and spirituality. And I also discovered that when you get on a spiritual plane with somebody, it can easily cross over.
Okay.
Because the two energies are very similar. And of course, in marriage, that's a good thing, but
right.
other situations, that's not always a good thing. And that's why I think, counselors and youth workers and pastors and people that are really spiritually intimate with other people really need to watch their step, because it can really cross over, and it happens.
Right. Absolutely.
So I wanted to investigate what this was all about.
Okay.
And I'd read things on tantric sex, but I wanted to know if there was actually a Christian experience where Christians experience the presence of God while they're having sex. And so I actually did a phenomenological study where I interviewed 5 Christian men and 5 Christian women who had experienced the presence of God while they were sexually intimate. And I want to tell you that it blows the doors off of what most people know about sexual intimacy.
Okay. How so?
Well, I mean, so this kind of interview, you just ask them about their experience, right? And then these themes emerge and so on. But there were a number of themes that came out, like the sense of wonder and amazement. Like people were overwhelmed that God would participate with them in this very intimate and very connecting kind of experience. And there's a sense of emotional cleansing. Most people were very emotional, and sometimes they cried.
Right.
And it wasn't just, weeping for sadness at all. It was just more of an emotional cathartic experience.
Almost like an overwhelming, euphoric kind of a feeling where just the emotion just comes out that way.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like just, it comes from the depths, and it has to leave their experience in a way. And they talked about the intensity of the union. Like they'd never felt so close. It was like the barriers between them were no longer there. They were one.
Right.
It actually kind of reminds me of the French term for orgasm. They refer to it as le petit mort, which means the little death.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like you die to self,
right,
so that you can merge with another person. So where you end and the other person begins, you no longer can tell the difference. So they talked about that, and they talked about this euphoric kind of transcendent experience, and it was a very sacred moment, and it was very pleasurable. Like the pleasure was beyond what normally had been experienced.
Right, it was more than just the physical.
Exactly, but still very physical.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting, because the tantric people actually want you to deny orgasm, to forget orgasm, so that you can find spiritual high. But this was full person, right? Body, soul, spirit, the whole business. Women were, multiply orgasmic, that kind of thing. It was very holistic and very transcendent, and they felt blessed and full of awe, and it was full of mystery and all these things. Like, people don't generally talk about all those things.
Right.
They talk about a normal kind of sexual encounter.
Right.
So obviously this is a very peak spiritual sexual encounter that changed them too, because afterwards they felt very passionate. I remember one guy said, after my wife and I have one of these experiences, it's not like they have them all the time, but when they do, he said, sometimes I think I need to wear a hoodie because I think I'm glowing. And people are going to wonder what's going on with me. But they just felt more passionate about life. And
is that, do you think that is there a correlation to what you were saying earlier of discovering that the need for sex and the need for spirituality is trying to find completeness, if you will? And then you couple that with the idea of the yada, or the knowing, they knew them. And there's something kind of extremely powerful about the human soul of when we are seen and known, and then we also experience that from somebody else, and then you add a spiritual being to it. That's like a huge recipe for greatness.
Well, and actually, the secular research also confirms this.
Okay.
We have quite a few researchers on the east coast of Canada here, Menard and Kleinplatz and those people, and they talk about optimal sex, and one of the facilitating kind of factors that they talk about a lot is honesty and being known, and actually being in a place of so much safety with this other person that you can bear not only your body but your soul, and have it held and have it accepted. And while that's risky, it's also transforming. It's totally unifying. And I think a lot of us are kind of afraid to take that leap. We're afraid to really let ourselves be known, like our feelings, our thoughts, our desires, our what we actually experience with the other person in that moment. But if we could do that, that would be part of the transformation process, as well as actually inviting God to be part of it. Now, wouldn't that be something?
Well, I'm still, what comes to my mind is one of my clients early on in my practice, when this had to be kind of a divine thing that happened in the session for me, because as we were talking, and she was by herself, I'd been working with the couple, but she was talking when she came in by herself once, and she was talking about guilt and shame associated with sex. And I just, for whatever reason, blurted out, well, have you ever thought about praying during it and actually inviting God into that aspect of your life that he created? And she was like, are you kidding me? I can't do that. Right? No, those things don't go together. But you're sitting here saying, when it does go together, that's how we touch something even more profound.
Exactly. In fact, I mean, that whole notion of God not being part of sex is that dualistic kind of heritage that we inherited. But because the other part of my study actually asked these participants, what were the facilitating factors that led to this spiritual sexual encounter? And communion with God was a big one. Like actually praying together. Because actually, I think prayer is a very vulnerable thing. If it's real,
absolutely, it
real
is
heartfelt prayer, not
absolutely
praying for the missionaries, but more like God, this is what's going on with me, and in the presence of my partner and my spouse, I want to tell you that I'm actually feeling a little distant from you, and I'm actually not feeling very great, and yet I kind of long to experience more of your passion and your prayer, like that kind of prayer. Whoa, that kind of makes the present.
That's a part of being known, right? You're making yourself known, and in the presence of God, but also in the presence of your partner, if that's the case,
Exactly.
if they're participating.
And I think that breaks down our walls. In fact, I often tell couples, to start praying naked together, and then take it from there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, other things that facilitated were things like forgiveness, confession, forgiveness, right? Which obviously, if there's issues that need to be removed, barriers, then there needs to be some kind of forgiveness, and that brings reconciliation. But also just taking the time and setting the space. This is not a 5-minute deal.
Hope not.
No, this is this is kind of setting up, maybe even with rituals, like music, or bathing, or incense. I'm not into that, but some people.
Well, just setting up the environment and just taking care of setting up a stage and a scenario.
And not having time limits on it.
Okay.
Just having an ontological context where things can just be free and open up and see what happens, right?
So
and maybe looking into each other's eyes, and all those things, right?
So that begs the question, though, Chuck, is part of the pushback maybe you've received, or the reluctance people may have hearing the combination of these two, of sexuality and spirituality.
Yeah.
Because you even touched on the idea that a lot of the language, especially in the Hebrew, is very erotic in nature.
Right.
And is it because as humans, especially in our society today, there's a part of us that's scared of the erotic, or it's shamed, or it's a taboo, or, I mean, there's a lot of different messages that come alongside this thing that could be derailing it before it even gets started.
Well, it is interesting. I think there's a lot of paradox with like, we desire it, but we fear it.
Yes.
Right? We really long for this connection, but we're very afraid that if we actually opened up that much, whoa, what would this other
what would I do? Well, I say this on the show several times, of I have a belief that a lot of husbands, though they say, I really want a sexually fully turned on wife, there's a part of them that's scared if that actually happened.
Oh, it freaked them out.
Because it's like, I don't know if I can handle that much.
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, sex is such a paradox. I think spirituality is too.
Okay.
And that the ultimate is letting go, right? It's surrender.
Yes, it is.
To the experience, and that's scary, because we want control, and we don't want to find out what might happen if we really let go. And that's what happens in spirituality. If we really let go, you might discover God or parts of ourself that maybe we weren't really that keen on discovering.
Right.
And same in relationship with another person. So tough choice, but
and it's one we can't get around.
But valuable and worth it if we take the risk.
Absolutely. Right? That's fantastic. Because you think about the idea of, I've always had the belief that a lot of the problems we face in married life are our own doing, right? That I keep getting in my own way. And what you're proposing and what you've discovered is maybe how I'm missing out on what could be even possible is because I'm getting in my own way in the fear of surrendering, in the fear of truly being vulnerable and being seen, being known.
Right.
That's good.
And that's the mystery, right? That's the mystery.
Yeah, it is. So you're saying you don't have the mystery solved that you can now share with us?
Well, my take on that is that I think we need to learn how to celebrate mystery rather than solve it.
Nicely played.
And I think if we can learn how to celebrate the mystery and just kind of go, wow, this is amazing, and this is mysterious, and isn't it amazing that I get to be part of the mystery, like whatever mystery it is out there.
Right.
But our orientation is we want to solve it, because then we think we can kind of have control.
Well, that goes back to the control factor of now all of a sudden I don't have something out there that I can't harness or understand or use to my benefit. And instead I've got to just recognize, how do I experience these things rather than control them?
Yeah. And it's crazy. In our adulthood, we need to kind of have faith as a child again and just kind of go for the spontaneity and the experience of it. But we have all these social structures that we've learned to kind of hold back and be careful, and so it kind of limits our ability to actually connect.
So then we could actually use the marriage and the sex and the spirituality as laboratories to test this out even more, to experience and enhance it even more.
Well, I think to discover God more.
Yeah.
like if we're sexual beings, God is a sexual being. I don't claim to understand the Trinity,
right?
But sex kind of helps me, because if God is a perfect lover, which is kind of the fundamental attribute of God, then the Father loves the Son loves the Spirit, and the Spirit loves the Father, and that love is back and forth, and it's so perfect that they are one, but yet they are separate, and we get a glimpse of that, in sex.
Yes,
right.
But it's a small glimpse sometimes, right?
It's a very small. Well, there's this old Latin proverb that goes, "Every creature is sad following sexual intercourse." And I think it's because we had that little glimpse of oneness,
little taste of it,
and now we're back to our incomplete, self that just has to realize there's more. Yeah,
that's good. Well, Chuck, any other last little things that have come up from what you have found that really would help the Sexy Marriage Nation?
Yeah, I just like to say this. I think that if we prepare to actually meet the soul of our partner and the spirit of our partner and God, we will actually meet it. We will discover it.
Right.
And again, I think in the Old Testament, when the high priest would go in once a year to the holy place, he would do all these preparation offerings and rituals and so on. And it's kind of like, going to church. If we actually prepared ourselves to meet God, we'd probably meet God, but most of us just show up and see what happens, right? And I think it's the same in sex. If we actually prepare to meet the soul or the spirit of the other person and of ourselves and God, then we can actually discover that might happen. And I like kind of comparing it to what the Celts used to talk about. They used to talk about these spots in nature that they thought the spiritual and the natural energies crossed over easier. They called them thin spots.
Okay.
And I think sex is a thin spot.
Okay.
I think sex is a spot that we could actually go through easier to discover something greater than ourselves.
That's a great path and viewpoint to kind of think going forward. I like that. Very good. So Chuck, tell people how they can find you if they want to learn a little bit more.
You know what? Probably the best way is just to email me.
Okay.
Because I've got a number of articles that are in journals, and depending on whether people want to read academic journals or not, but I have some other ones too. But if they're interested, they could email me at McKnee, MACKNEE @TWU.ca.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to send them some things.
And I'll put that in the show notes so that maybe there'll be some follow-up, because you'll have intrigued some memories and some thoughts like you did with me on this. This is fantastic. So Chuck, I have to say thank you for joining me and leading the charge on this one.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, this has been Sexy Marriage Radio. If we left something undone, let me know. 214-702-9565 or feedback@sexymarriageradio.com. So wherever you are, whatever you've been doing, thanks for taking some time out of your day to spend it with us. We'll see you next time.